I woke to the kind of silence that screams no AC hum, no fridge buzz, just a hot, breathless hush that pressed against my eardrums, like a held note before a scream. Then the smell arrived, sweet and metallic, a copper and citrus stench sliding under my door. Fire has a perfume you never forget. It smells like memory melting. I rolled out of bed and the floor was already warm, a fever beneath the wood. Down the hall, an orange pulse licked the edges of the walls, teasing, tasting, choosing. I grabbed the doorknob and skin singed with a quiet kiss. I yanked my hand back, swallowed the pain, and shouldered the door open into a dream of hell. The living room was a chapel to arson flames, bowing at the sofa, tongues of heat fluttering the curtains like black angel wings. Through the heat shimmer, she stood at the curb in a pale robe, mug in hand, chin lifted like a queen inspecting. Ruins Karen, HOA royalty. She didn't flinch, she watched, she smiled. My house coughed a roof beam into the night, sparks bursting like a stadium cheer. I stumbled outside barefoot, lungs clawing for air, and she raised her mug in a tiny toast. As if this inferno were a compliance check, I finally passed. Firefighters arrived like thunder-given wheels, hoses uncoiling serpents across my lawn, while my life collapsed in wet ash and hissing steam. Neighbors filmed behind fences like jurors in pajamas. Karen never moved, not a step. She spoke to an officer with that HOA cadence, precise, syrupy, killing by centimeter, then handed over a folded document. A complaint. A covenant. The fire mirrored in her pupils, twin sons of someone who'd finally won. When the last wall sighed into coals, I stood shaking in a foiled blanket, smoke tattooing my throat. The arson investigator circled, jotting, nodding at patterns, V-shapes, points of origin, accelerant blooms the way lilies open on funerals. He asked me about enemies. I said one word. He glanced toward her. She pretended not to hear. The night bled into morning. I bled into emptiness. Insurance calls droned like flies. My dog's collar warped into a figure 8 was all I found. In the soot. By noon I was a refugee in my own street, watching a backhoe feed my past to a steel mouth. Karen finally drifted away, robe replaced by a blazer, heels biting the sidewalk like punctuation. She left without looking back. That was her first mistake. The second was forgetting I had eyes in the walls. A week later, the courthouse smelled of floor polish and stale fear. I sat on the wooden bench, hands raw from days of sifting ash for anything that felt like a heartbeat. The docket droned. Then the door opened, and the room temperature dropped. Karen entered dressed like a verdict navy suit, pearl smile, a binder hugged to her chest as if it contained commandments. She didn't sit at the defense table. She chose the plaintiffs. My name versus hers. Her versus reality. Emotional distress, the filing said. My jaw clenched until it clicked. She'd set a match to my life, and now wanted damages for the smoke on her conscience. The judge peered over glasses. Her attorney stood, voice slick as new paint. He spoke of my non-compliance, of ongoing harassment, of unsafe exterior conditions. Like a dead hydrangea was a detonator. I didn't interrupt. Listened.com as a drawn bow. Because in the pocket of my jacket sat a quiet miracle. A micro SD card the fire hadn't killed. The cameras were new, hidden in the eaves like patient spiders. The living room cam melted into slag, but the driveway cam's casing charred just enough to shield the heart. I'd dried it in a container of rice, whispered prayers to electricity, and watched my screen blossom with night. What it showed had teeth. The judge asked if I wished to respond. I stood, the room creaking, the way old ships announce storms. I told her I had evidence relevant to both the civil claim and the parallel investigation. The bailiff took the USB like it might bite. On the monitor, my driveway appeared in monochrome grain, my car sleeping under a jaundiced street lamp, my porch a rectangle of dim timestamp. 2:17 a.m. A figure entered the frame from the sidewalk, robe, belted, hairpinned, a metal can swinging from her hand with the casual rhythm of watering roses. She moved with the intimacy of someone entering her own kitchen. No hesitation, no glance for cameras. She crouched by the garage, splashed, then traced a liquid line along the siding like a signature. At 2:22 a.m., a lighter winked alive. She cupped the flame, then pressed it to the ground. Fire ran up the fuel like a rumor. Hungry, certain. The courtroom made a sound I've only heard once before, the moment a roof gives up. Karen didn't breathe. Her attorney's smile fell off, his face without touching the floor. The judge leaned so far forward her chair complained. I let the video play until the frame flooded white. Then it cut to me stumbling out, coughing, a ghost made of smoke. I paused the footage and finally turned to look at her. Still distressed. "Karen?" I asked, voice steady as a blade laid flat. Karen's face didn't crack so much as recalibrate. The smile retreated like a tide that suddenly remembered the moon. Her attorney objected, on something flimsy foundation, chain of custody, but the judge's gavel tapped once, and the sound behaved like a trap snapping shut. The investigator stepped forward, confirming the camera placement and the recovery timeline, explaining how heat warps plastic into a cocoon that sometimes spares the memory within. I watched Karen study the exit signs, the way a drowning person studies clouds too late for weather. She wasn't frightened. She was calculating, counting squares on a chessboard she thought she owned. "That's not me," she tried. But the frame seized her profile like a fingerprint. The neighbor's porch camps happened at sunrise, offering a second angle that braided with mine. The judge inhaled, slow, like someone savoring the exact second a lie realizes it's been seen. Then Karen did the thing that betrayed the animal beneath the pearls. She reached for her phone, not to call counsel, to delete. Her thumb fluttered like a trapped moth. The bailiff glided over, and her device vanished into an evidence bag, with a sigh that sounded like doors locking. I didn't look away. Predators eat hesitation. "We'll adjourn for 15 minutes, the judge said, which in judgment, reconsider your life choices. In the hallway, I leaned against cool marble and counted my heartbeats until the number steadied. Karen's heels approached, a metronome sharpened into threat. She stopped beside me, without turning her head. "You think this ends in court?" she whispered, breath mint over something sour. "This ends when you learn to leave people alone," I said, and even I was surprised at the steel under my voice. Her laugh was tiny and expensive. "You never belonged here," she said, "not with your peeling paint and your mutt barking after midnight." "My dog died in that fire," I said. Silence rearranged itself into a blade between us. Her reflection in the marble smirked. "Mine didn't." "See you inside," she said, and walked away like a verdict on legs. Back inside, the judge's voice wore iron. She consolidated the civil complaint with the arson investigation for evidentiary efficiency and set an accelerated schedule. Karen's attorney requested dismissal. Denied. Requested suppression. Denied. Requested oxygen. Implied. I kept my eyes on the screen as the investigator cued a second clip. Earlier that evening, jam 10:31 p.m. Karen measuring my grass with a rigid tape, jotting note, photographing my porch light like it had committed treason. She circled my mailbox, tested the hinge, lifted the lid, and freeze frame slipped. Inside a folded warning, printed with HOA letterhead. The notice cited, yard decor non-compliant, which meant the ceramic frog my niece painted had offended by. Another clip, the community email chain, printed and highlighted, where Karen warned neighbors that standards are contagious and rot spreads. Under her name, a digital signature flourish like a guillotine ribbon. The judge asked if a protective order existed between us. None did. I'd avoided Karen like thunder avoids whisper. But avoidance doesn't cure obsession. It seasons it. The investigator summarized chemical tests, traces of accelerant consistent with gasoline on my siding and on a cotton swab taken from Karen's gardening gloves, found drying neatly on a rack. Her counsel angled his body to block her from sight, but she angled back to make sure I saw her roll her eyes. It was theater, and the audience was the law. The judge set the next hearing for Friday, ordered Karen not to contact me, and reminded her that tampering with evidence is a second felony. Seeking a first dance. The gavel fell. Everyone rose. And the ground under my feet remembered how to be ground. Rebuilding began with a map pinned in my head. Studs, joists, wiring paths, a future home sketched over a grave. I rented a storage unit for donations that arrived like rain neighbors. I'd never met pressed blankets into my arms. A contractor offered a discount. A barista slipped me a gift card with a conspirator's wink. Kindness is its own accelerant. It spreads quicker than anyone predicts. Each night I slept on a friend's couch and dreamed of water. Each morning I returned to rubble and sifted. On day 3, under a warped skillet, I found the metal tin that held my grandparents' letters, edges singed, ink ghosted, but legible in places, fragments of love surviving combustion. I sat on the curb and read until the afternoon, forgot to move. The investigator called then. Lab results were in earlier than expected. Matches. The lighter's residue matched the compound found at my siding. Shoe treads matched prints on my gravel path. "It's strong," he said, meaning the case, but it felt like he meant me. That night, someone rattled my temporary fence. I rose from the folding cot and listened. Whispers like leaves gossiping. A camera blinked red on the post. New overt. A warning as much as a witness. A figure stood in the dark across the street beneath a dogwood tree that had watched the fire with floral indifference. Too far to know, close enough to feel. I dialed the police, voice calm because fear had burned off, leaving caution behind like ash. By the time headlights swept the block, the figure was a memory with legs. The officer took a report and promised patrols. Before he left, he said, "Some people crumble when the heat comes. Some people anneal." I chose to believe I was becoming glass that wouldn't break again. The next hearing arrived like a held breath, finally allowed to escape. The courtroom was colder, or maybe I'd lost insulation the night my roof curled into a fist. The investigator brought in a box of evidence bags. The lighter recovered from a storm drain 2 blocks over. The shoes from Karen's garage, with char in the treads. The robe fibers that matched residue near my porch. Her attorney objected in waves that broke against a stone shore. Then came the moment that rethreaded the day. Audio. My doorbell cam, though it died in the blaze, had uploaded clips to the cloud before the world boiled. On the speakers, 2:05 a.m., a hush made of crickets and the far-off sigh of tires. Then the soft jingle of keys, the scrape of a metal spout against wood, and clear as a confessional whisper. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "This is what happens when you ignore notices," Karen's voice said, intimate as a secret meant for one ear. The courtroom didn't move for 5 full heartbeats. Her attorney pinched the bridge of his nose like he could press time backward. Karen stared straight ahead at a patch of air that had never prosecuted anyone before. Today, the judge ordered the recording sealed pending the criminal filing and looked at me as if trying to measure the distance between ruin and resolve. "We'll proceed," she said softly, which sounded like mercy wearing armor. I exhaled for the first time since the night of the fire. The breath didn't scrape. Outside, rain started, a clean sound that made the soot in my pores loosen its grip on my skin. I tilted my face to the weather and let it write something new over the old. Smoke. Rain fell all night, hammering the tarp over my burned frame until it drummed like war. I lay awake on the cot in my friend's den, eyes on the ceiling that wasn't mine, watching headlights paint brief ghosts across the walls. Every sound outside felt deliberate. A branch snapping, a gate creaking, the low purr of an engine that idled too long. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the new cameras. I opened the feed. The street was wet glass, reflecting the sodium streetlights, and there, half in shadow, half in halo, stood Karen. No robe, no coffee this time. Just a hooded raincoat and a flashlight that scanned my wreck like a surveyor marking territory. She walked the perimeter, pausing where the siding had been, where my dog's water bowl now sat warped into an oval. She crouched. I leaned toward the screen until my breath fogged the glass. Her hand moved, quick and purposeful. She placed something small into the ash and patted it down like planting a seed. Then she left, vanishing into the rain, without ever looking at the camera. My pulse climbed the walls of my throat. The investigator's number was muscle memory. By now, when he answered, I described what I saw, and he told me to leave it untouched until morning. "If she's planting something," he said, "she's just dug her own grave." At dawn, under a sky bruised from the night, he and a crime tech unearthed it. A charred scrap of paper, ink smeared, but legible, an HOA violation notice, with my name printed in bold. It was dated for next week. The planted notice became a blade in the prosecution's sheath. In court, the tech explained how the edges were unnaturally burned, inconsistent with the fire's origin, suggesting it had been set alight separately before burial. Karen sat, stiff, hands clasped so tight her knuckles bleached white. Her attorney didn't object. Maybe he'd run out of angles. Maybe he'd found his conscience in the parking lot. The judge's pen moved in steady strokes, notes carving the day into memory. I watched Karen's eyes flick to the gallery where a few neighbors sat, their expressions shifting between shock and a private, almost guilty vindication. They'd lived under her rule-lettered warnings in mailboxes, fines for citations for unauthorized Halloween pumpkins. Some had told me in whispers they'd suspected she'd go too far one day. None imagined too far would look like my house in flames. The investigator then produced a new exhibit, a hard drive seized from Karen's home computer under warrant. Its browser history was a scavenger hunt through malicious searches for accelerant flashpoints, how to disable outdoor cameras, an arson statute of limitations. She swallowed hard, her throat working against a tide of regret or rage. I couldn't tell which. I kept my gaze steady. Predators hate being observed like prey. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp, with the metallic promise of snow. Reporters clustered like crows, their lenses black eyes that didn't blink. I said nothing. Truth doesn't need a press conference when it has a court date. Karen emerged minutes later, trailed by her lawyer, who looked like a man carrying a bomb with no timer. She didn't meet the cameras, didn't scan for allies. She went straight to a black SUV, idling at the curb, the kind with tinted windows, that turned daylight into suspicion. Before the door closed, she glanced back not at me, but at the building, as though memorizing its walls for the next battle. That night, I drove to the ruins of my house. The ash was damp, the air still faintly metallic from the rain. I stood where my front door had been and let the silence stretch until it felt like a rope between my ribs. Then, faintly, I heard tires on wet asphalt. Headlights bloomed and a car slowed. The SUV, it idled just long enough for the hairs on my neck to rise, then rolled on, vanishing into the black. The investigator would tell me later it wasn't illegal for her to drive by. But it's stupid, he added, and stupid has a way of showing up in court. The final hearing began with a smell coffee and old paper. A scent that reminded me of libraries where every book is a verdict waiting to be read. The prosecutor laid out the timeline, in a voice as methodical as clockwork. The months of harassment, the violation notices, the gas can, the lighter, the video, the audio, the planted notice. Each point was a nail, each exhibit, a hammer. Karen's attorney spoke briefly, not with confidence but obligation, his words collapsing in the air, like wet matches. Then Karen took the stand. She swore in with the hollow bravado of someone hoping volume could drown evidence. She spun stories of neighborhood decay, of my defiance, of the HOA's noble mission to protect property values. But under cross-examination, the mask cracked. She admitted to walking my property the night of the fire, to inspect damage. She admitted to possessing gasoline for garden equipment. She admitted this, with a twitch too, knowing my cameras existed. The prosecutor let the silence after each answer stretch just long enough for the jury to taste it. When she stepped down, her eyes passed over me like I was a smudge she couldn't erase. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow, clean and unburned. The jury vanished into deliberation, the door sealing them in like a vault for hours that felt like years. I sat in the gallery, elbows on knees, staring at the grain in the wooden floor, until it became topography, a map to anywhere but here. The investigator leaned over once to ask if I was okay. I nodded because okay is easier than explaining the humming in your bones. Across the aisle, Karen whispered to her attorney, her posture taut, her eyes restless, scanning faces like a gambler reading tells. Time bent. The bailiff's voice finally sliced through the static. All rise. The jury filed back, their expressions weathered but firm. My pulse thundered so loud it nearly drowned the foreman's words. Guilty, on all counts. It landed, not like a shout, but a gavel inside my ribs. Karen's face froze mid-blink, a photograph of disbelief. The judge thanked the jury, set sentencing for the following month, and ordered Karen into custody pending appeal. The clink of cuffs in that quiet room was louder than the fire that had destroyed my home. She didn't look at me as they led her out, but I watched until the door swallowed her, and the space she left behind felt like air finally remembering how to move. That night, sleep was less a state than a ceasefire. Dreams bled into memory, the hiss of accelerant, the roar of ignition, the smug lift of her coffee mug. But when I awoke, the air was different. Lighter. I walked to the ruins in the pale morning, and stood where the living room once held Sunday mornings. Coffee. My dog curled like a comma beside me. The top was gone. The debris was sectioned off with police tape fluttering in the breeze. I didn't touch it. Some graves you leave closed. My phone buzzed a text from a neighbor with a photo. A for sale sign on Karen's lawn, angled like surrender. The caption read, "Guess the HOA throne is vacant." I stared at it for a long time. Vengeance had never been my language. Survival was, but I won't. Lie, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing the kingdom she'd burned my home to protect was crumbling under her own weight. I walked away without looking back, because some victories are best carried in silence. In the weeks before sentencing, the neighborhood shifted. People who'd barely waved before now stopped to talk, to share small histories, to confess they'd felt the heat of her scrutiny for years. The HOA board called an emergency election, Her allies either resigned or melted into apologies. The new president came to see me at the rebuild site, hardit in hand, and promised common sense would replace commandments. I smiled, because promises are like houses, they mean nothing if the foundation's rotten. I hired a contractor who listened more than he talked, who sketched blueprints that breathed light and left space for quiet. The day the first new beam went up, I stood in the skeletal frame and listened to the wind whistle through it, a sound that felt like future. In the distance, a dog barked, different pitch, different rhythm, but enough to pull a smile from somewhere deep. I realized then that home isn't walls or paint or bylaws. It's where you can stand in the ashes and still picture tomorrow without flinching. Sentencing day arrived, wrapped in winter's sharp light. The courtroom was packed, neighbors, reporters, strangers who'd followed the trial like a serialized novel. Karen entered in County Orange, wrists shackled, chin still lifted as if defiance could rewrite facts. The judge read the terms with surgical precision. 15 years, no parole for the first 7, restitution for damages. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. The gavel fell, and the sound was both an ending and a beginning. Outside, microphones waited, but I walked past them, down the courthouse steps into a cold so clean it stung. Snow had started, fine and weightless, settling on my coat, my hair, the streets that had seen too much fire. I drove to the rebuild site. The frame was higher now, the shape of rooms emerging from the skeleton. I stepped inside, the floor still raw, the air smelling of cut wood and new starts. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the quiet. And for the first time since the night of the fire, it didn't feel like silence waiting to break. It felt like peace.